But, thanks. The 144th Psalm, finishing up, there's not a whole much more in it. But I mentioned to you that, in this psalm, I would offer that there's a potential that this was written by a woman. And part of the reason is because of the words that are used in it and the imagery that's used in it. But there's some fabulous things that we saw last week, and I won't go back over it. I want to go back to the verse 12, because we will repeat one so we can back into it. But we were on verse 13 when we ended. But if we look at verse 12, this is 144th Psalm, verse 12. By the way, the one expurgated from our hymn book. We don't use this one. Then those heir, those ben, those son, whose son, those son, in their youth, and in there was added, Nahur, in their state of youth, will be well nurtured, that is, gadal, twisted, that is trained like plants, natah, like something planted. And I thought it was interesting that the boys are twisted and forced to grow right, where the daughters, our daughters, female builder of family, will be like pillars, the pillar at the angle. And I think this is such a fantastic word choice. Now you ask yourself, who would choose this word to train up sons like you do vines, right? You take a vine and you force it to grow in the proper way. But the daughters are like the corner pillar. And remember, I told you the corner pillar. Remember, we talked about capstones and cornerstones. So just refresh your memory. Remember, what does a capstone do in an arch? It holds it up. So if you pull the capstone out, the arch falls down. But a cornerstone doesn't hold up a building, does it? But what does a corner pillar do? It holds up a building. And who makes corner pillars? Greeks. And who makes corner pillars that are carved in the likeness of females? And what are those females? Goddesses. So, I mean, if you didn't know anything else about this psalm, if you take the 12th verse in this psalm and you see what it says, you immediately know that the writer is writing pre-Greek or post-Greek. Big time post-Greek, because of the words that are picked and used. And not only that, look at the word usage. The guys are twisted, forced to grow, which is what mothers have to do, right? The great Mother's Day theme here. But the daughters are pillars. And not only pillars, and also, what does this also indicate? If I wanted to call, if I were talking about Roman buildings, what word would I use for the corner, for the thing that holds up the Roman building? Capstone. So this has to be pre-Roman period, right? But yet I use a word that infers pillars on a building, which infers Greek. So this has got to be post-Greek and pre-Roman. Beautiful. How you can, we have seen this in almost every psalm, that just by picking apart the words in the Psalms and looking at how the Psalms are written, you can place them in time. You can place them in time within 100 years. Just perfect. Beautiful. What else goes on in this one? That's about it. Well, the other part is, listen to this. Okay, not just a pillar of a building, but it's carved. And by the way, it is carved means the word is to carve wood. In Hebrew, you have a word for carving stone, and you have a word for carving wood. Two separate words. By the way, there's a word for carved idols that are carved out of wood, and a word for idols that are carved out of stone, and also a word for idols that are made by molten metal poured into a mold. Each one is different. So these pillars are carved in wood, which tells you something else. Where are these pillars being made? Are they being made in? Probably in Assyria, probably in Persia, Babylon. The reason is because where do we find most stone carved structure? In Greece, because they have marble. But when you go look at, for example, the artifacts that you find in Damascus, what's the problem with carving? They're stone. What's their stone like?
It's really sandy.
It's sandstone. It's a different type of sedimentary rock. It's a different type of stone. So you really don't find a lot of, you find some carved stuff, but very few, and most of it's not load bearing. So when you built it, well, the temple, remember the temple. How was the first 2 temples built? Actually, the first 3 temples, but the first 2 temples built.
Stone upon stone, we're talking about.
Cedars of Lebanon?
The first 2 courses were wood, or actually, the first course was stone, and the next 2 courses are wood.
When you say courses, do you mean like layers?
Well, we don't know exactly what courses mean, but you know, the word used, would be like a layer or a level. All right. So it says when it talks about Solomon's temple was built of a single course of stone and then 2 courses of wood. Did it have a top? Don't know. Probably not. The probably not is because how do you keep stuff from falling down like in wood? Anybody who's worked with wood knows wood can only be made so long and trees are only so big, right? And then you end up with, well, why'd you use the cedars of Lebanon? Because they're long and strong and cedar doesn't rot very well. But still, how wide are you going to make it? Can you make a 40-foot ceiling? Not open. You got to put stuff in it. So anyway, there were courses, and all of them until, guess whose temple were courses like this? Herod's temple is a Roman temple. Roman built. Because they used Roman techniques. And in his temple, it's a stone arch. And so there is a capstone only in Herod's temple. There is no capstone in any of these other temples. And they're wood. Any pillars? Remember, there are no pillars in the design of the temples that were built, you know, in Solomon's temple or the other temples. However, what did we find in the tabernacle? There weren't no pillars, but what were there? What was the tabernacle built out of?
Tent.
It was a tent. And so, what kind of tent was it? Was it an enclosed tent? No, it was basically, and the temple, the way the temple was laid out is just like the temple is laid out in Solomon or Herod's temple. You have the Holy of Holies. We don't know if it had a roof on it or not. It's not clear. Then you have the holy place, and there was an opening here. And then you had the temple, and this was all, well, curtains, and the curtains were held up by poles. And they were ornamental poles, and there's exactly so many on each side, etc. And there's an opening here. One opening. And the temple itself, remember, what did they replace these with?
Do you mean tabernacle? You keep saying temple.
No, yes, I said temple. The tabernacle was poles and cloth, fabric. But the temple, what did they replace this with?
Pillars.
No pillar. Well, this is where we're talking. Remember, this is what I love about the history. Because when we talk about history, we're talking about 2,000 years here, 1,500 years at least, right? And so in 1,500 years, things changed. We started with the tabernacle that was made of cloth, and then we went to Solomon's temple. In Solomon's temple, the courses, they had stone as the base for all this, and then they had, well, we don't know. Were there 2 courses in this with any openings? We don't know. There was an opening for the, coming into it. This is called the mesocline. If you look in the New Testament, it's called the mesocline, which is the low wall. And then this is the Holy of Holies, and this may be where the 2 courses were of wood and 1 course of stone to block out sight. But still, was there a roof? We don't know. Probably not. Because who was descending and ascending into it? God. And by the way, let's see, I can't remember which side it's on. I think the altar's here. The altar's here, and the wash place is here. I think that's right. Anyway, I'll go back and look at my notes. But in any case, this became stone. And then in Herod's temple, this was pillars so that you could look into it. And outside of this, they were divided it again. This was the court of this was the temple court, and this is a court of women.
Where's the
And then the court of Gentiles outside this. But this is a mesopoint. And by the way, what did the Greeks destroy? Greeks and also the Persians destroy this part. Because you can't have an altar inside a temple, right? So the altar was an abomination for the pagans to put an altar inside of a temple and kill animals in a temple. So that was the abomination to the pagans. And then they later cut this down, and then, in Herod's time they rebuilt it, but they rebuilt it so you could look through it. That's why in the court of Gentiles you could look into the area, which is really interesting. Because remember, that was a huge point of proselytization by the Jewish people. But in any case, just wonderful things. Isn't it beautiful how the stuff that comes out of a single line in a piece of ancient poetry has so much depth in it of history and in antiquity. To me, I find it incredible. But it goes on to say in that, and this is the point I'm making in this, it says that these were carved wood to adorn, to basically, and the word is not adorn, it's tabithia, which means a structure built as a model. And it says in your translation a palace, but it's not, it's a hekal, which is a large public building. And you only find large public buildings in, guess what? Who builds large public buildings? Romans and Greeks. Romans and Greeks. Do Persians build large public buildings? No. No. The temples are for whom? Are the temples for the people? In any culture, any ancient culture? No. Temples are for the gods and goddesses, and then for the priests and priestesses. Everybody else stays where? Outside. See? They're not public buildings. And all the palaces that were built by the Persians are not. They're not public buildings. They're private buildings. They're the king's buildings. The Greeks built what? Forums. They built entertainment, what do they call it? Hippodromes and arenas and places for art and music and for public assemblies. They built public buildings. So I think it's really disingenuous for them to translate this as palace, because it gives you a totally wrong impression. It's a public building, not a palace. And by the way, if you remember back in Malachi, this same word is used for the temple as a public building. See? Because in the worldview of the Hebrews, the temple was for whom? It was a residency for God as a temporary residency. Well, they claimed it was God always claimed that it was temporary. But the people, it's really funny because the words that's used in the Old Testament are really at odds. If you see God's words, God said it was my temporary dwelling place. But the people built him a bayet, which means a permanent house. Isn't that interesting? Especially the tabernacle, because the tabernacle is a temporary place of residence, a tent. Right? And all the words are that God resided temporarily. I was worried about Solomon and David. Anyway, that's worth another study, isn't it?
Lionel?
Yeah.
Are you parsing the word too much?
I don't think
It is
so.
a permanent structure. It may be a temporary residence.
There are two words in Hebrew. There's a word oyel, which means a tent, which is temporary. And it literally means a place that's visible across the desert. But a tent is always considered some place of, you pick it up and you move it around. And it's not a permanent residence. A bayit is a house, which is it comes from the word to build. And it's a permanent place of residence that you build.
What I'm trying to say is,
yeah,
you may have a permanent residence that is your vacation house, but you're only there temporarily. Is the building permanent? Or what I'm saying is, when you're parsing the words, are you distinguishing between God's amount of time spent there or the actual residence?
I'm parsing it between what people want to believe about their God and what their God really believes about himself. We want to believe that God stays here all week so he doesn't see what else we're doing. Right? The pagans built temples to their gods because their gods resided in those temples. They built beautiful, wondrous structures that were supposed to be their gods. That's the world. Now, does the Hebrew temple look more like a pagan structure or more like the structure of the tabernacle that God demanded?
Tabernacle fashion, wasn't it?
It was, well, we don't know. Because remember, God, and this, yeah, I guess. This is a really interesting point that's from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Because the supposed missing document. What's the missing document? Do you remember how God told Moses to do what with the tabernacle? He told him every single measure for the tabernacle. He told him the exact material to make it out of, the exact way to build it. Everything was accoutered and specific. There is supposedly a missing document from the Old Testament that the Essenes were looking for. And the Essenes wrote on their own. Except the ones the Essenes wrote was the exact copy of Herod's temple. And you can't have Herod's temple because you couldn't have a stone building at that period. So it's impossible. So there is in the Dead Sea Scrolls an Essene scroll that describes the temple, just like the tabernacle was described. But it's not considered part of the Old Testament documents, and it's also not considered, you know, it's pseudographia.
Yeah.
So my point is this. All right, if God really intended for, you know, Solomon and David to build them a temple in the fashion of the tabernacle, what would he have done? Given them specific instructions on how to build it, but we don't find that in any of our records.
In fact, aren't there some words to the effect that I have this nice house to live in, I'm going to build something for you, God, and God said, don't need it, but he went ahead and he said, okay.
That's my point. That's what I said, you know, I mean, that's perfect, Carl, because that's my point. You know, that's what's worthy of a study. Because did God want to be housed in a temple?
No, he was not.
No.
Didn't need it.
Right? No. It's a good question.
You know, the same question is, did God want them to have a king?
No. But he let him have it.
But he let him have it. I love that. But he let him have it. You know? So, yeah. So, you know, I think this is, okay, if you want a takeaway, here's a theological takeaway, right? Many times God lets people, whole peoples, and us have things that really probably aren't the best thing for us. And we get punished ourselves because of it. But, you know, that's a theological thought, right?
Maybe God's letting us learn, here's the rope, go hang yourself.
There you go.
You'll
There you
figure
go.
it out.
But anyway, let's move along. You know, in line 13, okay, it says, an hour is added. It's barns, mezev, all right, now we're going to start in something that's very interesting in this psalm. Because before this, the psalm is very indicative. In other words, it's not nearly as euphemistic. The words that are used past this point in the 13th and on are dual-use words, completely dual-use words. The words it says barns, mezev, it's not barns. The word is a dual-use word. It means a place to gather in and a place to gather in. So it can mean a public building to gather people, but it can also mean a granary to gather grain. It's a place that you gather in, and it's also a place that you gather things in. So mezev is a dual-use word. So depending on how you translate this word, depends on the rest of the whole psalm's meaning. Now, what do you think? Do you think the author wanted you to use one or both? Both. It's poetry. When you write poetry, you pick these words intentionally to mean dual use. We've missed the point because I wish we had our Anglo-Saxon back. Because in Anglo-Saxon you can do a lot of English, you can too. We have metaphors and similes like crazy. But we tend to, matter of fact, I wrote about this in my blog yesterday. You know, people apologize for puns. Why would you apologize for a pun? You either thought about it and intellectually threw it into the mix, or you accidentally came upon it. So if you intellectually thought about it and then you apologize for it, you're an idiot. But if you accidentally came upon it, then why apologize for it? It makes you look smarter, right? Because puns make you look intelligent. Puns are a way of expressing, intelligence in English, because English is a very euphemistic language, and so is Hebrew. So let's look at this. The barns, it's not barns, it's the places to gather in, either a granary or a public building, and we were just talking about a public building. So I would go with the public building, but the NIV translated this barns. Will be is added, it's filled, ma, full or filling with puk, which means an overflowing of every kind. Okay, the word here is translated provision, but it's not. It's zanel. Zanel means a motion toward nourished, or it means it can mean that you're fat, and it can mean that you are. It just means that you are going toward being well nourished, as opposed to going towards starvation. So literally this is saying, the places to gather in are full of what? People or provisions. It isn't clear to the overflowing. In other words, it could be overflowing with people, it could be overflowing with stuff. Every kind of zanil, and that is toward being nourished. Now, how can you be nourished? Eating. You can also be nourished spiritually. You can be nourished, in lots of different ways, intellectually. It goes on, and it's translated our sheep. It's not sheep. It's tsuson, which means a flock. It can be a flock of men. It can be a flock, a group of men. We don't call flock of men. But in Hebrew, the word is a dual use word. It can mean a flock of animals, or it can mean a group of men. So again, the author here is playing. Will increase by alpha. And all right, remember I told you about this word alpha. Alpha is what?
First letter of the alphabet.
The first letter of the alphabet. It also is a number. Remember, all consonants in Hebrew are numbers. So it can mean 1, and it can mean 1,000. It can mean a magnitude. So take your pick, which one you want to use. The translation is will increase by thousands, and this could either be an ox's head, because it literally means ox's head. It can mean 1, or it can mean 1,000. It can be a magnitude. So take your pick. Will increase, so it could be the oxen increasing, it could be men are increasing. And then it goes by tens of thousands, and the word is rabab, means cast together or increase, literally multiply by 20,000. So this rabab can either mean to cast together to increase, or it can mean multiply times 20,000. It's like the word, what's the word in Greek that means 20,000? There's a word in Greek that means 20,000. It's in Acts. Anyway, it'll come to me. Anyway, there's a Greek word that means literally 20,000. I don't know why is 20,000 so important to ancient peoples?
They wanted to know how to count.
I don't know. Yeah, well, we talk about 40 being as big as you can count. But why 20,000?
Millions or billions? Or,
Huh?
I mean, is it like a huge, if we say millions or billions?
Well, you can't say that anymore, right? It used to be billions and billions. Now it's trillions and trillions, and maybe quadrillions and quadrillions, But yeah, zazillions and zazillions. I don't know, but why pick 20,000? You see this in other cultures, so it's weird. In our chuts, and the NIV translates it fields, but it doesn't mean fields. It means outside the city. Oh. Outside the city. Why would it write outside the city? The places to gather, that is we've talked about, a public building, growing, full of people, full of stuff, but outside the city. What is outside the city in Greek thought?
Barbarian.
Danger outside the wall.
What public building is always outside the city?
No, when they send the sick people.
Well, the Asclepion could be, but that's really not a place to gather hugely. So I don't think they're talking about that. If you go look at every Greek city, and you go to Greek cities, you find this outside the city. They look like this. Well, not the arenas. The amphitheater for what purpose? For plays and for gathering the people for political reasons.
And that's,
Okay, another Greek thing here. But, you know, look what it's talking about. Where is the temple? Inside the city. Greek temples are inside the city, except for Asclepions and a few others that, you know, are not. But still, remember, Greek temples aren't public places. The only public places that are outside the city are basically the, there's a word for it. What is it in Greek? The word is the forum. Well, not Colosseum. Colosseums are usually inside the city. That's where entertainment is. There's a word for it. Forum? I think it's forum. Anyway, it's the arena. It's the arena for political purposes. Because remember, they put the arenas for arts where? Inside the city by the temples, because it was part of the worship. But for politics, they moved it outside the city for the political meetings. In any case, remember when in the Acts they took them out to the forum to discuss stuff? Anyway, in 14, all right, depending on how you translate this first word, it's either oxen or your friend. Because the word is alop.
really,
So it's either your friend or your bullock. It's not oxen. And literally, it can be a teacher. So do you see this? This writer is writing dual use. They're writing animal type barnyard, you know, type things about farming. And they're also at the same time writing about buildings. Now, you know, you might ask yourself the question, did the author have other words to choose from? The answer is yes. There's other words that could be chosen to express these similar points, but they didn't. They chose these words. They chose words about farming and provisioning and words about gathering together politically or gathering together people. And the words are so amazing. Well, we could do this in English too. But, you know, for example, what's interesting to me is the NIV. Now, a lot of this is difficult to translate. Like I said, if you pick one way, you translate it one way. If you pick the other way, you'll translate it the other way. Because in English, we don't have dual-use words exactly like this. We don't have a dual-use word in English that means oxen and friend or teacher. See? I mean, we might think that some of our teachers are like bullocks, but oxen, but, you know, I mean, that's another problem, right? It goes on, it says, we'll draw heavy loads. And literally, it's not draw heavy loads, it's kabal, which means to carry us. So a bullock can carry you, right? And so can a friend or teacher, right? Intellectually carry you. So you see this psalm is written on two levels. Do you see the levels? There's a level of, it's not right. There's a level that's an intellectual level. Intellectual, like for example, to carry you intellectually or spiritually like a teacher or a friend would. And there's also a level here that's simply eating or provision. Beautiful, wonderful. Like I said, all these poetries are like this. All these pieces of psalms are like this. They're wonderful like this. Will carry us. There will be is added. No is ayin, which means nothing, not exist. The breaching of walls, and literally it's peretz, which means a break in anything, a break in something. No going into captivity, and literally it's yatsa, which going out. So even though the NIV has translated this as breaking of walls and also going into captivity, which isn't a bad translation, but you notice that translation is going toward which side? The intellectual side, as opposed, they were doing a barn farmyard translation, and then they all of a sudden jumped to an intellectual, right? Because it could be read as the breaking of what? Breaking of the walls of a barnyard, right? Or it could be read as the break of not going to captivity, that is not capturing animals, or not enclosing animals, right? But instead, they chose to jump it. And that's what I'm saying. These dual-use words, you can really see the difference, especially in the way it's translated. No cry of distress, and literally it's tishava, which means a screech of anguish in our riochav, in our avenues or areas. So, if you take this the other way, what do barnyard animals when they're running through your city sound like? Right? So in other words, you could read this as the animals won't get out of the barns. You could also read this as because of the guidance of our leaders, because of the guidance of our friends or our teachers, then therefore we will not be led into captivity any longer. We will not. And there's already an implication here of what? Where are they? Babylon. They're in exile right now. Yeah. I mean, like I said, you know, we started in the timeline. If you have your timeline, and we started our timeline, and we said, okay, here's, you know, like 1400 BC, and here's 1000 BC, and then we said, you know, here's the Greek period about 500 BC, and we said, well, we can set this in the Greek period before the Roman period, which is about 300 BC, and we said, okay, we can probably put this someplace in between here, so we can match it with about 100 years, and then all of a sudden, bingo, bango, bongo, we just were able to set it almost exactly. We're putting it almost in the exilic period. 15, and I think 15 is the last one, last verse in here. Blessed is shared. How happy the flock. And by the way, they translate people, but the word is which means a tribe or a flock. So again, they could have translated it as the barnyard theme, but they didn't. They chose the intellectual theme. So how happy are the flock, the tribe, katha, violently struck. And by the way, this was a removed word. They took this word out of the NIV. Katha, violently struck, of whom this is kaka. That is, this is true. Kaka is a preposition meaning it's true from the previous context. Blessed, Asher, are the tribe or flock whose Elohim is Yahweh. Elohim is Yahweh. So in other words, if you were going to argue about how to translate this, would you translate this from an intellectual standpoint or for barnyard? If I were the NIV translators, I would have translated this intellectually and not barnyard theme at all. There'd be no barns and no animals or flocks in it if I was going to be intellectually genuous in the whole translation. However, did you notice we could translate it both ways? And again, if I were to, you know, it's very interesting because we can place this psalm right in a point. Did someone say this was subscribed to David? No, this one wasn't subscribed to David, the 144th. Very interesting psalm.
Mine says that David, my note in the NIV says that.
Yeah.
Mine just says the king. Mine says the king, thanks God for victory.
Okay. Well, see, remember the subscriptions are added. What version is that?
This is the good news.
Good news. Okay. Remember the subscriptions are added. Good news is paraphrased, but all of the subscriptions are what?
Added.
They're not original. Yeah, they're all added, right? They're added Greek. They're added in Greek in the Greek period. So we know they're late kind of stuff. But anyway, I mean, I think this is a very interesting psalm. Now, I'll just make some really close comments about this. Notably, post-exilic, likely the Babylonian captivity. There are great Greek indicators. We saw those at least 500 BC. Possibly, likely, I don't know. I don't think it's post-return, or post-return, pre-return. Can't be post-return, I don't think. Possibly written in Babylon by one who didn't return. Or, you know, maybe in that pure exilic period before they could return. There are the beginnings of the idea of spiritual salvation. Remember we saw the breakout between Nephesh and physical and Nephesh? Which, remember, Nephesh is just breath. But there is a breakout between the physical and the Nephesh. We will not see that in the 23rd Psalm. 23rd Psalm has nothing to do with spirit. Where this Psalm does have something to do with something with spirit. Late date Psalm anyway, we can see that. That really places the Psalm late. There's an idea of spiritual salvation mixed with a longing for physical salvation, literally through reproduction and through the return to the land. The context is affirmed in those last lines. The last lines in that are just really beautiful. the context is hidden. You know, when you're writing a psalm in Babylon, remember what was the psalm we studied? What was the one before this? Was it the 100? Which one was the one that was a terrible lament? I can't remember the number. Anyway, I think it's 143rd. Well, the one before this one that we studied.
137?
137 or 36? 36 or 37, the lament. Remember the lament? And it was a lot of the language was coded, right? Until the very end, and you found out you want to, kill the infants on the side of the fortress. This is also one expurgated from the hymn book. But in any case, did you notice that you could read this two ways? So if you're writing a psalm in captivity, how would you want the psalm to read? Right? Yeah. So that's another historical indicator, because you can read it two ways, and if you're reading that in one way, well, cool. And by the way, what level do you think the Persians are in terms of Hebrew? In terms of Hebrew. This is written in Hebrew. So what level do you think the Persians are? On the barn level or the intellectual level? Yeah, they're probably speaking Pidgin, right? Remember how you communicate with foreign people? Speak louder and more slowly? No, it doesn't work. Speak their language, for goodness sakes. But if you don't speak their language well, you're going to be talking about barns and not about universities. So, very interesting, because the context is hidden. And again, I will point out that a woman could have written this psalm. The imagery is beautiful. The imagery is very central. It doesn't blame women. Remember in the Malachi period, who do they blame?
Yeah, foreign wives.
Foreign wives. Who's this woman blaming? Who's this writer blaming? The man. Train my fingertips for war, my hands for battle. Guess who lost? It wasn't the women fighting out there that lost the battle. It was the men. And she wants to train the men up to guide them like vines. Where the women are what? The pillars. And by the way, remember, who determines Jewishness? The mother, the woman, right? There's a lot of indicators in here. Doesn't blame women, alludes to women as goddesses. Where did they get that idea? Greeks and Persians. Yeah, Persians and Greeks hold women in really high esteem. The men are plants to be manipulated. The women are goddesses. It's a bardic style. Very popular writing for the time. Points to the possibility of a woman bard. Or at least maybe a woman writing it for a guy. I mean, that happened a lot too, right? Women writing stuff, even in the, for example, the period of intellectualism. Women writing stuff that they later, George Eliot, for example. Women writing under men's pseudonyms. Anyway, points to late date style and language. Purpose of this psalm. This is a very deep psalm on many levels. Points to a spiritual turn of ideas. Brings back Egypt. Remember the Egypt and the concept of life after death? Very powerful psalm. So I want to point that out, and the best way to look at it within the context of a psalm that is very familiar to us. And so the psalm that's very familiar, and I gave it to you, is the 23rd psalm. Everybody knows this psalm, right? Well, we think we do. Look, all of our psalms are expurgated, right? We don't want to have anything that's. We don't want our children shocked by reading some of these psalms. I think they should be shocked. What do you call it? You ever heard of shock poetry? Right? A lot of this poetry is shock poetry. Well, the words. There's some beautiful words. This is a dual-use word. This word, mayim, we find it all the time in the Psalms. Many times it's translated as water. But literally in Hebrew, this word, there are other words for water. But this word is a euphemistic word that means also all human fluids. It can also mean wine, but generally it's human. And if you look at how the King James translates it, and I'm not going to even say it, because you didn't think you'd find those words in the Bible, did you? In any case, in the Old Testament documents. The other word here, menocha, is from to rest or settle down, but it literally means matrimony. This word, when you see this word, it means matrimony. No, these aren't good colors. Matrimony. Matrimony. Matrimony comes from mater, mother, marrying a woman. Okay, matrimony. There are other words we could pick yeshav, because yeshav means to settle or settle in a place. Those are the words used normally in Psalms. When you see this word, it means specifically marriage. Natal. This is a really interesting word. It means to run with a sparkle. Usually applied to like a brook or to a spring or to water that's running in a course. To run with a sparkle. Wow, what a neat word, huh? Desha comes from desha, means to sprout like grass. And this, this word means to sprout. But remember, Hebrew is euphemistic. So you apply it to things that sprout, but it also means what? The things that sprout. So by the way, this is translated pasture or grass. I think there's a list of those things that it can be translated as. Carry, feed, guide, lead, also can be translated grass. No, not sparkle. Desha means grass, green, herb. Naha. Naha means to be at home. This means to be at home, but it means pleasant. Pleasant. Rabatz. Rabatz, this is a really interesting word. You pick this word means to crouch. Like an animal crouches. Why would a person crouch like an animal? Crouching like an animal, not common in our culture, but it's really common in like Asian cultures.
Lots of times it's real how they converse. Yeah,
Be to rest.
That too, yeah. Well, what she's doing is, what you should do with all these words is picture them. Picture the potential in your mind. Because remember, especially in euphemistic cultures, in concrete cultures like Greek cultures, it's even more important to picture the words, what they mean. But in euphemistic cultures, you have to develop a picture. Because just like we had before, if I develop a picture that's on a barn level, I get one picture, right? If I develop a picture on an intellectual level, it's a totally different picture. And so I think it's very important, and we see this in English literature too, in English poetry, right? If you picture what the poetry is getting at, many times you can understand the poetry. Sometimes you have no clue, right? You know what I'm talking about? I mean, you've interpreted English poetry, and sometimes you go, what is he writing about? Right? And sometimes you go, click, because the picture forms in your mind. So that's the point. These words draw pictures. I'm writing about this in my blog about words as symbols, because language is all symbols. And I think intellectually we get away from that many times. Because in our mind, words aren't symbols. What are words to us generally?
Pictures.
What's that?
Pictures.
Well,
See it?
we don't. Okay. If I say the word love, what do you think about? I know what you think about. You think this. You think the word love. If I say love, you don't think about love.
We have to put it in context because we have no clue. I mean, we can't give it a meaning necessarily until we know how you're using it. It could be pizza, or it could be affection, or it could be a lot of things.
Because you're literate. She's right, but because you're literate. When I say the word love, you picture the word L-O-V-E. Period. See? You don't see this. This word is a symbol. This L-O-V-E is a symbol. And it means that until I specify, you can't even begin to imagine or picture this word. Right? We tend to see words as written word and not symbols. And yet all words are symbols. I think it's very important to note. In poetry, in art, in reading, in literature, in all these things, that is probably the most important thing to note. And if you get past that point, that really is the point of understanding anything. that's written. Period. And, of course, we can't forget that all ancient texts are mnemonics. How far is a mnemonic from a symbol? Is it closer to a symbol or further away? Do you think?
Closer.
A mnemonic is much closer to a symbol. Because the fact is that you've already memorized the text. You're using the mnemonic to help you make sure that you remember what the text was. So in terms of a mnemonic, what is more important? Is the word more important? No, the word isn't. What's more important is the memory in your mind, which probably is symbolic in large measure, right? That's how you memorize stuff. Except in modern literate cultures. In modern literate cultures, we memorize words. We don't memorize concepts.
We don't memorize anymore.
Yeah, we don't memorize anymore. Yeah, that's true, and that's sad. You know, that's something we should be teaching our kids right in school, but we don't do it.
Would that hold true for like someone who reads Braille? Like that they feel a word? Or do you know?
That's interesting. That's an interesting thought. And I haven't thought about it long enough to, I do know this. Well, Braille is probably the same as lecture versus, lecture and conversation versus reading.
Probably depends on whether they learned Braille, if they ever had sight.
That
They
too.
learned Braille, or whether.
Yeah.
That's a complex.
That's beautiful. Well, I've told you before, in ancient cultures, cultures that are non-literate, non-literate cultures can't have complex ideas. You can't. You can't. Because if I have an ancient culture with the word love in it, what can you picture to picture love? You can't. See? Now, you could do like the Greeks, and you have specific words for each type of love. And then I can get closer, right? But you notice, probably worthwhile. Do you guys remember the levels of religious thought? What does it start with? 1. What's the first level? Remember?
Animism.
Animism. Animism is God's in everything, right? And I go to paganism, actually pantheonic paganism, but that's okay. Paganism, pantheonic paganism, and then I go to Mysterion, and then I go to Gnosticism. What is the big change between animism and paganism? Literacy. What's the big change between pagan and Mysterion? Yeah, logic, philosophy. And what's the big difference between Mysterion and Gnosticism? Science. So, cultures start in animism. They're illiterate. When they gain literacy, they go to pantheonic paganism. And guess what they suddenly have a god of? Or a goddess of love. You start out with gods and goddesses. Well, what's Zeus? God of
War.
no.
Gods. Creations. God of
Thunder, lightning.
Thunder and lightning and mountains and hills.
Yeah,
Yeah, thunder, lightning, mountains and hills of the thunderstorms. He's not the God of gods. Did he create? Did Zeus create anything? No. Didn't create nothing. I have a God of war. Hephaestus. So, well, Ares in Roman. Actually, Zeus is Roman too. Oh, no, Zeus is Greek. But then there's whatever his name is, the cripple god. Anyway, he's the god of war, and became the god of. Oh wait, no, you're right. Ares is the god of war.
Ares and Mars, and Mars is Roman.
Yeah, Mars is Roman. Yeah, Ares. I think you're right. Ares. That's right. But then I have the god Hephaestus, or whatever his name. Hephaestus is the god of metallurgy, not the god of war. He's the god of metallurgy. But he is born of Zeus. all the other gods, the earlier gods, were born of the Titans, remember? But all the Zeus gods, like for example, Athena is a goddess of wisdom.
Kind of came from the brain.
Yeah, she leapt fully armed from the mind of Zeus. So, do you see this? Beautiful stuff. So with literacy, I get paganism, I get historian from philosophy, and from science, and Gnosticism. So, oh man, the same things for Braille and reading and writing, right? Because before I have reading, I can't really think in terms of advanced concepts. But once I get once I'm literate, I can.
So the Jewish people became instead of becoming the paganism or whatever you called it, pantheonic paganism, they went into monotheism. So they should be on a sub-parallel track there because they gained literacy and that's where they went into.
Yes, this is a paradox of paradoxes. Why did the Jews go to monotheism? Well, kind of. Because they did, but they didn't, right?
Yeah.
But they did. They went to monotheism. And they basically went to monotheism from paganism. They were already literate, right? They really didn't go from animism because remember, the Ur of the Chaldees and what god did Abraham worship? The moon god. See, pantheonic paganism. But he was probably literate. Probably. See, to some degree. But at least they went to Egypt, and Egypt was literate, pantheonic paganism. But yet the Jews before that, according to the documents we have historically, were monotheistic to some degree.
Lionel, you're defining literate as reading and writing.
Yeah. Being able to
Of
write.
only one language. I mean, if they spoke and wrote in more than one language, are they more literate, or are they? What's the qualification?
Well, that's a pretty cool thing. I'd like to say that if you can read and write more languages, you're more literate. I like that idea, but no, I think literate is just literate. If there are only two proto-languages. The proto-languages are the languages prior to languages, and there are only two developed languages that began everything. One of them was Egyptian, and the other one was Persian, or some kind of Persian thing. So, the Ur of the Chaldees, probably Abraham was linguistic, maybe literate in that either proto-language or in that language. It's the language of Elba, and it's the language of the cuneiform. So
they had symbols and representations of things.
They had symbols that represented sounds. Because remember, in words, the letters represent sounds, and the words represent concepts. And of course, phrases represent action and against a noun, etc., etc. You go on and on and on and on. But I'm not sure what you mean by more literate or less literate. But once you achieve literacy, then you can begin to expand as a culture.
Well, biblically, don't we believe that there was one language until Babel?
Yeah, but not written necessarily.
Okay.
And I don't know when Babel was. I mean, there are some people that try to number the world at 7,000 years or 4,000 years. I mean, okay, if anybody could find one number, maybe we could accept it, right? But you have biblical scholars, who pick 5,000, 4,000, 7,000, 8,000, 20,000. I have artifacts that reach back to 10, 20,000 years ago. And I have other artifacts that last much longer than that. I don't know. Remember, there is no word in the Old Testament for year, and there's no word for month, and there is no word for day. The closest is Yom, and Yom, translated day, means a period of time, because the Hebrews didn't have any word for, they only had two words for time. They have a word, Elohim, Olim, which means eternity, and they have a word for a period of time, Yom. So I don't know, trying to pick, I wish God had put a thing that says, trying to figure out how old the earth is using the Old Testament documents is the same as trying to figure out when Jesus Christ is coming again. Right? Cursed be he who tries to number the days. So, I don't know. I can't even figure out whether alpha means 1,000, 1, or an ox's head.
It means all of them.
Yeah. Well, which one are you going to pick? I mean, one of them means you're having dinner, and the other one means you got a bunch, right? So, I don't know.
Very few.
You know, this is a problem with numbers.
Yeah, or very few, just have one.
Or just have one, yeah. Well, this is a problem with numbers. And, I don't, that's why I don't like to, all I want to do is present a historical picture. The historical picture is Hebrew's euphemistic. Look at the last psalm we looked at. The psalm we looked at is a beautiful, complex, powerful psalm. But how many different, you can only get one really understanding of it, right? But how many ways can you get there? Lots. Lots. Because the psalm is written in a very complex, political kind of way.
Yeah, it seems like the Hebrews had to be very literate because, well, all their captivities and into Egypt, they had to know a lot of different languages.
Well,
I mean, they picked up a lot of different stuff from all the different places they were going.
well, and look who King Nebuchadnezzar, and also the king who conquered them, the king of Persia. What's his name? Well, Xerxes' son. What's that? No, the one that's in the Old Testament. It starts with a D, I think. but-
Darius.
Darius.
That was easy.
But remember, Darius, when they conquered, remember Daniel was one of the chief authorities under Nebuchadnezzar, then became an authority under Darius. What does that tell you? The intellectual level is pretty high, right? So, we'll do the 23rd Psalm next week. This is great discussion. Was it boring, Tim? Look, I was hoping to gain some points on Mother's Day, especially about the pillars and the goddesses. I mean, this is important. I have a house goddess. But in any case, I'm sorry if we spent too much time on 144th Psalm. It is my favorite psalm. But in any case, thank you, Father, for your word. We pray that you look after us this week. In your name we pray.